In this episode, we're going to get back to my family a little bit. And I wanted to focus on why I chose my pen name. I didn't use my real name in my writings, even though the pen name itself, the first name and the last name, are really the two halves of me. And I wanted to tell the story about my grandfather's family, the Pughs, P-U-G-H, just like my pen name. His name was Charlie Ray, and I didn't know him real well. I don't remember a whole lot about him. I remember that he loved to fish. I remember his old, I think it was a Chevrolet pickup, maybe a 60-something model. And I remember as a child, I could not go in that pickup. And I remember my mother telling me I may get a hook in my hand. And she was talking about his love of fishing and his fishing hooks. And I don't know what else could have prevented me from sitting up in that truck. But I remember as a child, I wanted to get in that truck and I couldn't. I don't remember too many interactions with him. There was one story where my mother said that when I was probably just barely old enough to walk and run, I guess, and I was at their house, which was right beside Highway 51 in the town of Louisville, just coming into Louisville. Not Louisville, Louisville. It's spelled just the same as Louisville, Kentucky, but it's pronounced Louisville. And I don't remember, really. The story goes, and she told me the story, that I was running toward the road, and he ran and caught me and popped me on my behind, and it got off with him. He felt bad about it, and she told him he did the right thing because I was running toward the road and could have got run over by a car. I don't remember that interaction, but the thing that I can recall about him is just one scene in my mind. As we were pulling up, they had a little carport right there at their house. We were pulling up, and he was coming out of the door. And I can hear his voice, I can see his face, I can see the smile on his face. As he called, I don't know if he called all of his grandchildren monkey, but he said, "Hey, monkey." And that's pretty much my memories of my maternal grandfather, Mr. Charlie Ray Pugh. And the reason that I chose to use his last name as my pen name is one of, I don't know how to really say it, but I guess hereditary inheritance. Because when my uncle, his son, is gone, that whole family name dies. It's gone. Going back to my great-grandfather, Frank Pugh. He had, well, let me say this. My grandfather had actually three brothers. Two of them died really, really young. And my grandfather passed away at 56 years old, so he died young also, but they passed away early and had no male children. My grandfather's other brother, who is still alive today, one of the oldest living Pughs that I know of, male-wise, he's probably in his early 90s now, I believe, maybe late 80s. I really can't remember. He lives way off in Louisiana. He had a son, but he passed away at an early age with no male children, no children at all. So the rest of his children were girls. And they, grew up, got married, and the name changed as it does. And after my uncle passes, that's it. It ends. And I've always wanted a pen name. I love my name, don't get me wrong. But I always wanted a pen name. And I thought about it for a long time as I was growing up and wanted to write and never did. And finally here I am pushing 50 years old, about to be 50 years old, and started writing 3 or 4 years ago. And I knew what I at that point what I wanted to call myself, and that was Pelham Pugh. My paternal last name, my maternal last name. And I did that so that something of the Pugh name will live on. It doesn't die. Hopefully. I mean, the books will be there forever. There'll be a book in some form from this point forward. It's the electronic age, and those books are not going away. So, Pelham Pugh came about because I didn't want that name to die out. I kind of did it to honor my grandfather, and in turn his father. Because the Pugh family, unlike the Pelham family, has been in this area forever. I've done a lot of research, and the Pugh family has been the easiest one to research because there is record on top of record, going back all the way to where my ancestors in the country of Wales or the United Kingdom. And a lot of the history of the Pugh family wasn't great, but they were one of the founding families of this county, Barber County, Alabama. I come across one story one time when I was doing research on my family, and one of my great-grandfathers or on back son, he was a preacher. And apparently he liked to drink a little bit, and he was thrown out of the pulpit for drunkenness. And eventually he apologized, and they let him back in to be a preacher. But the Pugh family, like I said, has been around in this county for a long time. And there's not many of them left. I know of a few, and that's it's not descended from Frank Pugh. It's more, I like maybe his brother or brothers. But as far as my great-grandfather, Frank, like I said, that line ends with smoke, and I just couldn't let that happen. Even though I'm as proud as can be to be a Pelham, I'm also just as equally proud of my mother's family and their history. So that's a little story behind why Pelham Pugh and why I'll go forward with that pen name. And I wanted to speak a little bit about my grandfather's wife, my grandmother. Her name was Nell. She was a Bowman, Bowman, and she came from a large family. She had 15 brothers and sisters. Not all lived to be adults. I think there was one set of twins that died at birth. She was actually a twin to my uncle Neil, Neal, or Neil. I may have misspelled it once or twice on a poster or something, but she was a twin, and she came from a large family. And she would tell the story of, give me a sip of coffee. When she was a child, there were so many children in the family, they wanted to make sure the adults ate before they did. And as they were eating like supper, the children would go play in the woods or something and come back and get the scraps. And my grandmother, she was opposite of that. You ate before she did. And she made the best tea cakes of anybody in this country. My other grandmother, LV, that I've taught before, could really cook fried chicken, but my other grandmother, she could make a tea cake. And if you've never had a South Alabama tea cake, you don't know what you're missing. But she can make some great tea cakes, and she was the sweetest lady. I've talked about how kind of my other grandparents were kind of mean, per se, but Nell was not. Nell was the gentlest soul that you ever met, and I'd say my daughter is a lot like her. She died probably in 2006, so she's been gone about 20 years now. It's about this time of year when she passed away, so it's right up, just about exactly 20 years. Doesn't seem that long. My grandfather, he passed away in 1981, I'm thinking, So I was 5. So like I said, my memories of him are not great, but I lived to adulthood and my daughter got to meet my grandmother. So I'm proud of that. But like I said, they came from a small town just north of where I grew up in Louisville, home of the Red Devils. They never changed the Red Devils. That'll be another story for a different day, but that's the high school I went to, and that was our mascot, and those who went to Louisville High School will always be known as Red Devils. And a lot of my family graduated from Louisville High School, and I'm very proud of that fact. And that's a podcast for another day. But I wanted to tell a story to kind of illustrate my grandmother a little bit, that she never learned to drive. As much as sweet as she was, she had a lot of can't in her. I can't do this and I can't do that. And my mother is the complete opposite. She can't stand that, her daughter. But my grandfather worked at a wood yard in Louisville. All I can remember of him was he worked in the wood yard. I've actually got his old keychain to the wood yard in a little shadow box right here behind me. And he was going to teach her how to drive. So they went to the wood yard of all places, where if you ever been to a wood yard, there's stacks and packs of lumber everywhere. There's very narrow little alleyways or roadways or pathways that the forklift comes down, it gets a pack of lumber and it moves along. But learning how to drive in that environment could not have been the best idea. So he put her behind the steering wheel, and put her in the driver's seat. And she proceeded to run straight into a pack of lumber. And I think that was the last time my grandfather ever tried to teach her how to drive. But she would go anywhere. If there was somewhere going, my grandmother wanted to go. My grandmother LB was a homebody. But Nell, she loved to travel. She loved to go. I think my mother's a lot like her, and I'm a lot like that. I love to go. I love to travel. I like to be away. But I think she did it to break up the boredom. Because she was legally blind in her older age. She had some kind of disease. I think it was macular degenerative disease or something like that. And she couldn't see real well. And I can imagine she lived in an apartment her last, 20 years of her life that I can remember. And thank goodness she had my Aunt Berlene. That was my grandfather, Charlie Ray's sister. And they were like peas in a pod. They went everywhere together. And I'm glad that she had her, because they lived right near each other and they kind of depended on each other. But she lived in an apartment. I can see how that would be boring. Those apartments are still standing. And when I go north on Highway 51 through the town of Clio, I can't help but to look over and see that spot where she would always sit outside. She loved to sit outside when it was warm. And I could see that. I look over and in my mind, I can see her sitting there. And even when I passed her house in Louisville, my grandfather's house, I look, because it's still there. If somebody's bought it years ago and it's changed hands a couple of times. But that's the yard that I was running toward the road. That's the carport that I remember him coming out of the door and saying, "Hey, monkey." And I can't help but to look every time I pass it. I was close to my father's parents because we lived in proximity, and I told those stories, and I'll tell more as we go along, but I wish I had more time. Well, especially my grandfather. I would like to have known him. I love to fish. I've always loved to fish. I would have loved to have gone fishing with him. Because my mother said he could fish anywhere. In Pea River, which is PEA, like a English P River, ponds he would sneak into. He just loved to fish, and I would love to sit there and fish with him. There's one picture of him when they lived in Winter Garden, Florida, and that'll be another story on his own. But he's holding up a stringer of fish that he had caught in Lake Toho down there, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the lake because I'll butcher it, I know. But I wish I could have sat there with him, and I wish I could have fished with him. I wish I'd have got to know him. But it was one of those things that wasn't meant to be. Like I said, and I'm trying not to be morbid in these podcasts, but I am trying to be reflective. Because the whole story kind of molds my way of thinking, I guess. I've always been very reflective. If you know anything about my writing, there's a book I wrote called Last Castle in the Sky, and that was something my grandmother always said. When you'd look off up into the sky and daydream, you were building castles in the sky. And that's always kind of stuck with me. I've always built those castles. I've always looked off. I've always thought about things. And I think, and this is kind of letting me talk about them a little bit, and especially things like my grandparents. And we will get to the books. Rest assured, I'm thinking my next podcast will start talking about my writing process and how I started thinking about Perfidious Tides. And I'm just glad that you indulged me for the last 3 or 4. Let me speak about my grandparents a little bit. Highly influential on my life. But I guess that'll wrap this one up, because I'm not going to ramble. You know a little bit about my grandparents, both sides, and you know a little bit about why Pelham Pugh. And I'll talk about my parents and other family members as we go along. There's a story that I'm writing now that's very, very personal to me. It's entitled Come Our Way. And I want it to be perfect. I'm taking my time with it. It's going to tell it's a fictional story that tells a real story. And we'll get to that. But the next time we talk, I'll probably start talking a little bit about Perfidious Tides and my thinking behind why I started writing it. And I appreciate you listening, and I'll talk to you later.